So I welcome you all in this today's session of rural governance. So today is the last session of this entire class, that is rural governance. So today we will cover the last unit of block 4, that is rural housing, and then we'll go on to cover the last block, that is emerging trends in rural governance. So in that block, we will cover Unit 12 and 13. Unit 12 is about autonomy and control of rural local bodies, and Unit 13 is regarding public-private partnership in rural development. Okay, so let us now we'll cover now the rural housing. Okay, so rural housing is one of the most important areas of rural governance. So we'll quickly try to cover objective of this session of this unit, that is rural housing. Then we'll go on to cover the rural housing in India, including its conditions and housing amenities and housing finance. Then rural housing plans and policies. How rural housing has always been one of the major focus of our 5-year plans. And then there are some national housing policies for rural housing that also will cover. Then subsequently, we'll try to cover some components of rural housing policies. Like there are some issues regarding land availability for rural housing, then rural housing finance, then adequate and affordable rural housing, and convergence for rural housing, institutions for rural housing, then sustainable rural housing technologies, and skill development for rural housing. Then rural housing programs also will cover, like Indira Awas Yojana, Gramin Pradhan Mantri Gramin Awas Yojana, that also will cover. Then subsequently we'll also cover Bharat Nirman program, that is part of Pradhan Mantri Gramin Awas Yojana. Then there are some rural housing agencies which play a very important role in terms of financing of rural housing projects, like National Housing Bank is there. Then there is Housing and Urban Development Corporation. We'll also try to go a little bit into its historical evolution, like how uh, Housing and Urban Development Corporation was established and what were its aims and objectives. Then, before we sum up, we'll also try to cover rural housing programs in Telangana. Okay. So that is the overview of this chapter, which we are going to cover today. So now, first of all, we'll quickly try to understand that what are the objectives of rural housing, how rural housing is important. So objective of this unit is basically to make you understand the occurrence of rural housing, what are their needs, some plan, policies, and programs. And there are some institutions of rural housing as well. So after going through this chapter, you should be able to understand. You should be able to have a broad overview of rural housing in India. Then some plan, policies, and programs regarding rural housing. Then how rural housing was envisaged during our 5-year plans. That also will cover. Then we'll try to cover all these sub themes in a brief manner. Okay. So rural housing is a part of public housing program, and it has been considered the main priority for the government, especially after independence. Like before independence, the during British time, rural housing was not given the priority and focus it deserved. But after post independence, beginning with some rehabilitation of refugee influx, which was a major issue being faced by our country uh, during partition at the time of independence. So till that time, since then only, it has become an instrument of poverty alleviation. Okay. So that's why rural housing program as an independent program, it started with Indira Awas Yojana in 1996, especially after this 73rd constitutional amendment. So it was implemented under Ministry of Rural Development at the central level. So there have been focus on rural housing by central and state governments at different levels. But since, especially this after coming to power in this present government at the center, especially since 2016 onwards, this Indira Awas Yojana, it has been revamped into Pradhan Mantri Gramin Awas Yojana, and its main motto is housing for all. Okay, so this is considered the world's largest housing program for the rural poor people by the government of India, and its objective was to build around 30 million houses, 30 million houses for the rural poor by 2022. Okay, so that's why it is considered a very important aspect of rural governance. Then Rural Development Ministry also, uh, it has taken some official initiative to assess the significance of housing shortage in rural India. Now there is one important data regarding this, that at the time of independence, at the time of census 2011, there were around 330 million houses in India, and out of which around 220 million were in rural areas and 110 million were in urban areas. So, according to this uh, one report by the Ministry of Rural Development in 2011, uh, there were a shortage of houses in rural India, around more than 47 million houses. So, we can imagine how this rural housing becomes a very important aspect of rural governance. Then we'll quickly try to note that rural housing conditions. So even in rural areas, there exist wide varieties. Rural housing conditions, like there are wide disparities, we can say, which exist in housing conditions in rural areas, especially regarding ownership of houses. So the proportion of self-owned houses in rural areas, it was higher in comparison to urban areas. Around 93.3% people, they're having self-owned houses in rural areas. And in urban areas, it is around 61.2%. So as per ownership status by social categories concerned, these figures also reflect that deprived social categories like ST, scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, STs, SCs, they lived in own houses in a higher proportion as compared to OBC classes and others. So this is also very peculiar and strange statistical data. Normally, it is believed that people from OBC, uh, they are comparatively having a better socioeconomic conditions than SC STs, but the data like uh, it shows something else. Then next comes housing amenities. So what is housing amenities? So housing amenities consist of drinking water, sanitation facilities, electricity, drainage system, etc. And they are also considered integral part of housing environment for any house. So this rural housing is not just about making buildings. Okay, so it consists of housing amenities as well, and these amenities are considered an integral part of the rural housing. Then comes housing finance. So there are different types of sources for finance of housing, and the major sources are like own source, which include own money like savings and labor. Then there are some other institutional sources like government, bank, provident fund, financial corporation, institution and other institutional agencies. And there are some non-institutional sources as well, like money lender, friends and relatives, landlords, etc. So, in order to understand the nature and pattern of sources of finance for rural housing, like these sources can be described like own sources, then government sources, money lender, friends and relatives, then other institutional sources like bank, insurance, provident fund, and some other non-institutional sources as well. Okay. Then we'll move on to plans and policies. So here I'll try to give you a brief overview of how rural housing has always been focus of some of our 5-year plans. Like in the first 5-year plan of 1951 to 1956 only, the government was facing a lot of challenge of uh, large scale in migrants population, especially they were refugees in urban areas, and as a result of the participation, as a result of the partition of the country. So nothing significant could be achieved like in rural housing during the planned period, because the country was also facing a lot of resource scarcity as well. Okay, so but later on, like in the first plan only, there were some strategies which were continued in the second 5-year plan, like government priority for settling the migrant people in urban areas. So again, the community development movement (CDM), which came into being in 1957, along with National Extension Services. They also provided like loans to individuals in the rural areas through cooperatives to construct houses. Then the CDM scheme continued under the third 5-year plan as well, and they were revised for like better results. Then after that, then comes like fourth year plan in 1969 to 74. Government introduced a cash scheme in the central sector to provide free of cost housing sites to the rural homeless. So the housing cum construction assistance scheme, it was introduced uh, from 1974-75. Okay. Then during the seventh 5-year plan, no, there is one more important thing. Like during the sixth 5-year plan, then that is 1980 to 85, sixth 5-year plan, what happened? That the Housing and Urban Development Corporation, that is called HUDCO, and the General Insurance Corporation of India, GIC, they were established for providing finance towards the urban housing, and also they entered rural housing sector. So, like it is the sixth 5-year plan, which is considered very important for rural housing and housing in general, public housing in general, with establishment of Housing and Urban Development Corporation and the General Insurance Corporation of India. Then during the seventh 5-year plan, what happened? That rural housing, it was given a serious thought for the first time by the government, especially government of India. So concerned by the like rapid increasing uh, shortage of rural houses, which increased from 16 million to 18.8 million before the beginning of the seventh plan. So the government like ramped up its financial assistance towards banks and cooperatives. So after that, the major highlight of this plan was introduction of Indira Awas Yojana. So it was introduced in the seventh 5-year plan, right? And it was also launched, like there was one scheme, sub scheme of this, known as Rural Landless Employment Guarantee Program, RLEGP. It was also launched. So Indira Awas Yojana, it was launched with the objective of providing financial assistance to SC and STs and rehabilitated bonded laborers for the construction of their own houses. Then comes another important thing, that is National Housing Bank (NHB). So NHB was also established in 1988 to expand the base of housing finance during this plan period only. So what are the major uh, initiative during the seventh 5-year plan? It was Indira Awas Yojana, then Rural Landless Employment Guarantee Program (RLEGP). Then comes National Housing Bank. Then based on this foundation, The first national housing policy, it was launched in 1994 during the eighth five-year plan, and its goal was to reduce homelessness, improve the conditions of dilapidated houses, and to provide minimum level of basic services. Okay, so then Ministry of Rural Development, like it also proposed some modification in Indira Awas Yojana under the ninth five-year plan. And these modifications included like introduction of a credit cum subsidy scheme and the launch of a sub scheme named Innovative Stream for Rural Household and Habitat Development, ISRHHD. This basically provided cost effective and environment friendly and scientifically tested houses to the beneficiaries. Then came Bharat Nirman program. Bharat Nirman program. Bharat Nirman program. It was launched in 2005 during the 10th five-year plan. So it is considered a major step taken by the government towards rural infrastructure development and rural housing on a national scale. So this program prioritizes basically shelters for economically weaker section or lower income group people. So Indira Awas Yojana, it continued to contribute towards rural housing. And then came National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development, that is known as NABARD. So NABARD also contributed towards the rural sector by providing finances to the beneficiaries for construction of houses. Okay. So these are all the like overview of this government initiative. Then 12th five-year plan, it also like attempted to converge the Indira Awas Yojana with some various other schemes for the purpose of providing rural poor housing or some basic amenities. Then in March 2016, uh, the existing Indira Awas Yojana, it was replaced with the Pradhan Mantri Gramin Awas Yojana. And it's the primary objective is housing for all by 2022 mission. So now Indira Awas Yojana has been replaced with Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana from 2016 onwards. Okay. Sorry, not 2026, 2016 onwards. Then national housing policies for rural housing. We'll quickly discuss about this. So the first ever national housing policy, it was drafted in 1988 as well, but it was ratified in 1994. Okay, it was ratified in 1994. It was launched. So it basically formulated the basis of the International Year for Shelter for the Homeless, which was declared by United Nations in 1987. International Year for Shelter for the Homeless. So primary objective being providing housing and minimum level of basic amenities to the people, and which can further improve the inadequate houses. So its objective was to like achieve the target by 2001 by 2001. But the policy identified the role of government as a provider for the poor and the marginalized sector and as a facilitator for the middle and higher order, so that like it can give impetus to the finance towards the housing sector. So draft national housing policy of 1988, like it has already foreseen the setting up of a national housing bank as well, like which can act as a apex level institution for providing housing finance. The national housing policy, which was drafted in 1988, it was implemented in 1994. This I already told you. Then National Housing Policy of 1994, it recognized the importance of both rural and urban housing in the overall development. Okay. Then comes components of rural housing policies. So what are the components of rural housing policies? Uh, Basically, the government has to define the role of various institutions to provide shelter in the rural areas in a very holistic and sustainable manner. Okay. So there are some components of rural housing policies. Like number one is land availability for rural housing, because rural housing projects they demand a lot of lands. Then so it becomes very important that the government needs to allocate homestead lands for the rural households, or they can regulate the existing housing sites, because land cost is like one of the major concern in urban areas. It's not much a problem in the villages with the support of village panchayat. So the government can easily procure homestead land for the replanning of villages and construction of housing stocks. Then comes one more important data you should be knowing, that the current size of the standard dwelling unit in rural areas, it has been increased to 25 square meter under the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Gramin, which is still not considered sufficient for adequate housing. Then the next important thing is rural housing finance. After land, cost of construction, it has also increased over the time. So the government has not been able to provide cheaper building materials and technology. So as a result, what happens? The cost of a house is becoming like unaffordable for the rural poor people. So lack of adequate financial assistance, it has remained like primary reason for the housing shortage in India. Lack of adequate financial assistance, rural housing finance is another bottleneck. As majority of the housing finance in rural areas, they come from the informal sources like the money lenders, friends, relatives, which is basically exploitative in nature. Then the government finances have so far remained inaccessible to the rural people. So, like the emergence of community-based financial sources, it provides credit at minimum rate, and it is promising, but still they have like limited resources at their disposal. Then comes the role of National Housing Bank and HUDCO, like Housing and Urban Development Corporation and National Housing Bank. They play important role in providing housing finance to the rural areas. Then one of the major reasons is like why there is a finance lack of finance for rural housing is that repayment of loans, which is like very less in rural areas as compared to urban areas. So this basically disincentivize housing finance for rural areas. Then similarly, like HUDCO, it has a scheme for EWS land lease, EWS land owning, and the village schemes. But National Housing Bank schemes for rural areas like PHIRA, they have been unable to cater the housing needs of the rural areas. So, moreover, around just 10% of the rural housing fund is allocated for the rural areas. Then there are some insurance companies like GIC, LIC cooperatives, and like they're also having no major contribution toward rural housing. Okay. Then next comes adequate and affordable rural housing. So the houses which are delivered under the schemes, they must be like long lasting. It should be like adequate and affordable and sustainable as well. Then there should be adequate ventilation, heating, privacy, security, resilience, and they should all be equipped with some basic amenities. So all these provisions have to be made available at an inexpensive rate within the same budget only. So this is another reason like why the given the poor income of the rural household, all these facilities seem to be challenging and out of their reach. So that's why the responsibility of construction of houses lies on the beneficiaries, but due to the lack of technical knowledge, assistance, and low level of skill training, the quality of houses remain poor, because responsibility of construction of houses, it lies on the beneficiaries, but due to the lack of technical knowledge, lack of assistance, and low level of skill training, so the state should facilitate access to information on innovation, design of structures, and construction materials. Consequently, the houses made by the beneficiary are of poor quality. Such houses dilapidate at a faster rate, and they contribute to the housing backlog in the long run. So the rural building centers and the Nirmiti Kendra, they have to ensure that effective and cheaper construction materials are made available to the needy. And it can be done through like public-private partnership, etc. Then comes convergence for rural housing. This is very, very important areas. Like there are a lot of schemes being done by the government, both at state and state level, so that like even though not directly for the housing, rural housing, but for a lot of housing amenities. So all these schemes which are there to provide some basic amenities like clean drinking water, sanitation, smokeless chulha, like electricity, waste management, roads and electricity. So it is essential to converge the various rural development programs and schemes with the rural house units to have a complete development of the rural houses. Okay. So like Indira Awas Yojana from 2013 onwards, what it had done, it had made it mandatory for construction of sanitary toilets along with the houses. Okay. So here there is a need of close cooperation and coordination between center and state government so that to make investment to ensure the availability of accessibility to education, health facilities, livelihood, and this basic infrastructure, they should be established for sustainable growth in rural areas. Then come institutions for rural housing. This is also very important. Institution for rural housing. So, presently, what is happening? The rural housing sector is getting little support from the government only. So the representation of rural housing policy, the government can direct the private sector to contribute towards rural housing sector. So if we can go for like very thoughtful and efficient policy making, which can make adequate and affordable housing, then that can be like very effective. Then again, for proper implementation and monitoring of such a scheme, Panchayati Raj institutions they need to be empowered and involved in the formulating of policies so that it can play a significant role in land mobilization, selection of beneficiaries, and ensuring the sustainable housing construction. Then comes sustainable rural housing technology. So sustainable rural housing technology, the low rate of there is like very low rate of awareness and literacy among rural population. So this makes it very difficult for them to gain access to the technical information regarding sustainable and cost housing. So presently, what is happening that rural housing in India it is severely lacking on the technical front. Sustainable rural housing technology is a like method of housing construction that involves the use of cheap, environment friendly, and locally sourced materials like bamboo, bagasse boards, fly ash based bricks, mud and lime for building cost effective, comfortable, and calamity resistant houses, which can provide adequate standards of living. Then it also integrates the use of local construction techniques suitable for the climate and geographical conditions of a region with the elements of modern architecture and technology as easy to use construction machinery, fabricated components, use of use of agricultural and industrial byproduct waste construction material, and some advanced architectural features that enhance the quality and sustainability of the houses. So organizations like Building Material and Technology Promotion Council (BMTPC) and National Building Construction Corporation Limited (NBCCL) they're like responsible for promoting sustainable housing technology in India. So this institution can also play an important role in dissemination of technology and knowledge and distribution of cheap and sustainable construction material. Then comes the last component that is skill development for rural housing. So here, there is already lack of skill in terms of rural housing finance. So this makes it like unsustainable due to the lack of trained skilled laborers, and it also leads to like poor quality of rural houses. So skilling on rural housing, it will generate like large employment opportunities also in the non-farm sector. Then the government and the non-government agency, they can like train construction workers in short courses approved by the Technical Education Council. Then comes the rural housing programs. We have already discussed about Indira Awas Yojana, like housing programs house site come construction, then housing scheme for SC, ST, then subsidize housing for the rural poor, and community development program. Like there are different categories. So, like some of the important key rural housing programs will quickly cover. First is Indira Awas Yojana, which I have already given a like short introduction of. Then it was considered the most comprehensive housing program for the rural population in India. And as I told you that it was in sixth five-year plan when it was launched as a sub scheme of this RLUGP. Then later it became a sub scheme of Jawahar Roजगार Yojana, and in 1996 it became an independent program under the MORD, that is Ministry of Rural Development. Uh, it basically conceived to be a part of like larger strategy for rural poverty eradication as well. Then it was implemented through District Rural Development Agency (DRDA). At the village level, Gram Sabha was made responsible to identify and select beneficiaries. Then Department of Rural Employment and Poverty Alleviation was responsible for the release of central share of funds. And but from 1993 1994 onwards, Indira Awas Yojana, it covered the non-SC/ST people as well who were in the BPL category. And from 1995 1996 onwards, its benefits have been extended to widows or next of kin of the defense personnel killed in action. Then since 2006-7, now provisions are being done to set aside Indira Awas Yojana fund for minorities as well. Then comes Pradhan Mantri Gramin Awas Yojana. Before that, there was Pradhan Mantri Gramodaya Yojana, Gramin Awas Yojana. So its objective was to like sustainable human development at the village level. So Pradhan Mantri Gramodaya Yojana, it was launched in 2001, 2001 in all states and UTs. So this program, it was basically based on the pattern of Indira Awas Yojana as well, on Indira Awas Yojana only, and it was to be implemented across the country. Okay, so it basically had the local available materials, and it wanted the houses to have provisions for smokeless chulhas and sanitary latrines. Okay, so like it tried to provide additional allocation of central assistance to the states and UTs. Then came Bharat Nirvan program. It was launched in Bharat Nirvan program. It was launched in 2005 to basically boost the rural infrastructure development, and it covered like areas like rural infrastructure, irrigation, roads, housing, telecommunication, power, water supply. So this program, like gave a major thrust to the rural development, and it was the first major scheme where a quantitative target on such a massive scale was envisaged. So it basically tried to provide the basic amenities in rural areas to bridge the rural-urban gap. So it was launched by UPA government in 2005. It targeted to create around 6 million rural houses for the poor. Then came Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Gramin. So this scheme, before that, like Bharat Nirman program, it attempted to converge also various centrally sponsored schemes with the Indira Awas Yojana, like Rajiv Gandhi Gramin Vidyutikaran Yojana for electricity, then total sanitation campaign, Jan Shri Bima and Aam Aadmi Bima policies, like that. Then came the last one, the latest one, that is Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. It was uh, this scheme was actually launched from 2016. So under this scheme, the major hike in the financial assistance provided to its beneficiary, which is around 1.2 lakh per housing unit for the plain and 1.3 lakh for the hilly areas. Where the assistance extended Indira Awas Yojana was like very less, it was around 70,000 and 75,000 respectively. Then aims and objectives of Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Gramin. It is basically to provide a pakka house with basic amenities to all household or houseless living in the kacha and dilapidated houses in rural areas by 2022. So to achieve the objective of the housing for all, the target number of houses to be constructed by the 2021-2022 is 2.95 crore. So the immediate objective was to cover 1.00 crore households in rural areas that are around houseless or living in kacha or dilapidated houses in 3 years. right? Then comes rural housing agencies like National Housing Bank and Housing and Urban Development Corporation. These both are the major ones. But beside that, like we know that National Housing Bank, it was established in 1988 under the National Housing Bank Act of 1987, basically to provide housing finance to the urban and rural poor people. And there are some other refinance schemes funded by the government, like Rural Housing Fund, launched in 2008, then Golden Jubilee Rural Housing Refinance Scheme, launched in 1997, then Productive Housing in Rural Areas, PHIRA. Then comes Housing and Urban Development Corporation, established in 1970. It is a public sector company under the Ministry of Housing and Rural Poverty Alleviation. So it was created to look after basically to housing needs of the urban areas. Then the three types of housing schemes were financed by HUDCO in rural areas, like EWS Rural Housing Scheme for landless person, then EWS Rural Housing Scheme for land owning person, then Village Abadi Scheme, including house repair targets for improving the quality of houses. Then comes in Telangana, before rural housing programs in Telangana. So government of Telangana, like it has also formulated this double bedroom housing scheme in 2015 only, basically to provide the 100% subsidized housing for poor people. So there is no beneficiary contribution in this scheme, which is one of its kind. So in rural areas, beneficiaries solely depend on seasonal condition for their earnings. Then 2 BHK housing help in protecting them from debt traps. And so under this scheme, like the beneficiary, they neither takes a loan nor contribute, which is a great boon for the rural poor families and for dwelling in. So it is a like paradigm shift from a credit and subsidy based scheme to a fully subsidized scheme. So before we sum up, like we can say that the center and state, they are responsible bodies to provide funds for the construction of houses, and they have launched a lot of schemes, right from Indira Awas Yojana to Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Gramin, and even in Telangana, there is a rural housing scheme. Then, however, there should be a separate rural housing policy for India, so that in order to cater to the uh, deteriorating rural housing situation. Uh, okay, so that is all about this. And for more detail, you can just quickly go through your textbook. Then next comes there are another two chapters. Like here, we can sum up that while India aims for timely completion of rural houses, there is sustainable construction of houses still remains a big challenge. So our actually focus should be on sustainable housing, which is affordable and like accessible to all. Then India is also facing even a greater challenge with monitoring the sustainable construction of houses. So this is another important part. Then let us move to the next part of this, that is autonomy and control of rural local bodies. So there are two units in this. This is block 5, and another is importance of uh, public private partnership in rural development. So we'll quickly try to cover both the chapters. Okay. So first we'll try to cover autonomy and control of rural local bodies. So what are the objectives of this chapter? Here basically we'll try to understand or try to explain you about the control mechanism on rural local bodies in India. Then you'll also try to understand the autonomy of rural local bodies and what are the changing perspectives of autonomy as well. And after that, we'll sum up. Okay. So rural development is like one of the major objectives of the government in India, as right from we have seen Mahatma Gandhi's statement that India lives in its villages. So rural development is really one of the top priorities of the government of India. So that's why rural local organization they constitute an important link in the chain of service delivery system of the country. Okay, so that's why it becomes very important that they should have some degree of autonomy and control Uh, okay. Then, moving on to the uh, control and rural local bodies, right from the committee, like Balwant Rai Mehta committee, they suggested that there should be a three-tier system of Panchayati Raj for rural local government, like Panchayat at the village level, then Panchayat Samiti at the block level, and the Jila Parishad at the district level. So Panchayati Raj, like it has become like an agency of the state government, and these institutions form part of the decentralization state. So that's why these institutions, they are interested with some work by the state government, and they are supposed to execute the same. And finally, after the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1992, what happened that these local bodies, they were devolved with certain functions and functionaries and funds as well. For example, as per this 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act, there are 29 uh, different types of functions which are interested for the this rural governance. Then a survey of these local bodies reveals that though they are considered subordinate legislative and administrative bodies, but they are not sovereign entities. What does it mean? It means that the government at higher level, like at the state level, they exercise more control on them. So this democratic decentralization is not like it's not very effective on ground. That can be said. So why does it happen? Like the state government, they has a lot of power to delimit and alters the jurisdiction of the local bodies. So it has basically control over appointment of staff, then records management, financial administration, the election as well. So that the state government, it though it allocates grants in aids to Panchayati Raj institution for expenditure and promotion of local services and development, but still the state government people, like they're deputed to work under or from the institutions in all the state. But the district collector still is empowered by, like in many states, to conduct inspection of the working of a panchayat raj institution. So the state government, in a way, it exercises controls like institutional control, administrative control, technical control, financial control. There are different types of controls on these bodies. Okay. So how these controls are exercised? These controls are exercised in terms of like rules and regulations, approval of budgets, advice and guidance, inspection, grants in aid, audit of accounts, like okay. Then suspension of like their fund, something like that they can do. Okay. Though there have been institution like State Finance Commission was also created as a part of the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act. But the problem is their recommendations are not mandatory in nature. It is completely up to the state government to devolve or not to devolve functions, functionaries and funds on the local bodies. Okay. Then comes autonomy of the rural local bodies. Autonomy, what is autonomy? Autonomy basically is like the freedom and the non-interference in the activities. So its literal meaning is that self-government autonomy means government of PRI, they are confined to a particular area of functional jurisdiction. Okay. So the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act, it has provided for functional autonomy of PRI, right? Like it has allocated different areas, or there are 29 different subjects where which is the responsibility of PRI. But still, as I told you earlier, that these functions have not been effectively devolved to these bodies. Okay. Then comes changing perspective of autonomy. So like recently what is happening, that there is growing trend of centralization of the state over local government. How it is happening? Like there are some different changes which are being noticed. Like number one is lack of financial resources. States themselves are facing uh, crunch of shortage of funds. So they themselves are not in a position to devolve adequate fund to panchayati raj institutions. So that's why their control and centralization is increasing. Then number two, inability of the local governments in meeting their manifold problems. Like there is a lack of capacity building of the local bodies. So one thing is like they don't have their own resources generation. Then another thing is they don't have even like adequate capacity in terms of skill and staff as well. Like normally it is considered that the three F, that functions and functionaries. So like there is inadequacy in all these three parts. Then there is a popular belief also that the efficiency of central and state government is much better than the efficiency of local bodies. The reason is like still rural India is uh, grappling with so many like socioeconomic challenges, or there are some traditional issues as well, like casteism and all. So they have not been like truly democratic. Then state action on broad social problems, like they also permit the performance of essential services over a wide area in accordance with like national policy and informed standards. So that is also an important thing, but in a way it also hinders the like complete or adequate decentralization of power to the local bodies. Okay. Then like these are the issues with this. Then let us quickly sum up that there is a need for local government autonomy so that it can allow the local government specific powers to perform like wide range of function. And it is also in line with principle of subsidiarity, which is considered very important. So what is this principle of subsidiarity means? The problems at the local level, this should be solved at the local level. The problems of the state level should be sorted out at the state level. So this principle of subsidiarity is a very important, especially in a federal republic like India. So that's why in order to promote local autonomy, even 73rd constitutional amendment and even some committees like including second administrative reforms commission, they have also given some recommendations in their like uh, some of its report. So we need to follow these reports and these recommendations in order to have effective decentralization of power. Okay. Then comes the last chapter of today, that is public-private partnership in rural development. This is a very small chapter, so we'll quickly cover this. Like, what are the objectives? Then introduction. Then what is concept of PPP all about? Then public-private partnership in India, need of PPPs in rural development. Then PPP projects in rural development, and we'll also have critical objection before we sum up. So we'll quickly try to cover concept of public-private partnership. So what is PPP? PPP is basically considered uh, like as per United Nations, like there should be effective cooperation between government and non-government actors to bring about solutions that are mutually beneficial. Okay, so PPC is also considered like a legal formal agreement for collaboration between public authority on the one hand and a private entity in the market on the other for some specific purpose. So what are these specific purpose? These specific purpose are basically long-term projects in terms of infrastructure, then public utilities, etc. Right? Then comes like what are those areas? What are those areas which are considered crucial focus of PPP in India? So like development of power sector, urban rejuvenation, high quality transport system, then world class road infrastructure. Okay, so these are some crucial areas where there is a role of private sector and public sector to work together in tandem with each other. Then there are some important remarks by some bodies or some committees, which also we should be very clear that one is like it is a policy decision and initiative of the government at any level to promote public interest and public good. Okay, and then privatization and PPP. Like sometimes, like often people are confused between privatization and PPP. So PPP are not complete privatization because privatization involves outright sale of public service or utility to the private sector. Whereas PPP means private management of public services through long-term contract between a private operator and a public authority. So, in terms of PPP, it doesn't reduce the responsibility and accountability of the government. Okay, but here privatization does. So, this is a sort of collaborative arrangement only, where government remains accountable and responsible for ensuring the standard of the service quality, price certainty, and cost effectiveness. So in fact, it is also said that PPP, the role of government, like it doesn't change. It gets redefined. Like the role of government doesn't government cannot just do away with this. But here government role is redefined as one of facilitator and enabler. As the private sector become financier, builder, and operator. Okay. Then there are some important committees which we should be knowing, like Rakesh Mohan Committee in 1995, Committee of Infrastructure 2004, then Committee on Infrastructure Finance 2006 under the Deepak Parekh Committee. Then with adoption of new economic policy in 1991, like there have been serious and conscious efforts towards a shift from the sector to private sector framework of economic development. Then 11th five-year plan, it also gave a beautiful remark that private, which is stated that private public partnership must aim at bringing private resources into public projects, not vice versa. It doesn't aim to uh, bring public resources into private projects, rather private resources into public project. Okay, so PPP for efficient delivery of public services and infrastructure development in power, telecom, energy, transport, and water and sewage sector. Okay, then comes it is going to play an important role, uh, basically there to assist the state government so that it can uplift the disadvantaged group of people through its social exclusive and inclusive policies. Okay, so like before that we'll also try to quickly cover, there are some areas, there are some PPP projects in rural development. Now, why there is a need of PPP partnership in rural development? As I we have discussed it earlier that development of the country is possible only through the participation and empowerment of rural people, right? Because rural development is vital for the inclusive growth of the country. We cannot have a country where like our urban cities and uh, urban centers are considered like engines of growth, but our rural areas and rural sector, they are like backward, or there is a lack of development over there, because we live in a country where more than two-third of our population, around two-third of the population, they lives in villages. So unless we lift our villages up, unless we promote inclusive development in our villages in terms of rural development, then that cannot lead to an inclusive and egalitarian society. So with this, there are we can consider that this public-private partnership is very important, especially in rural development, because our government have limitations in terms of uh, limited resources, and also in terms of uh, uh, technical expertise, technical and management expertise. So that's why public-private partnership in India, it is considered the need of the hour. Okay, and another important thing is the globalization in contemporary era. It has also started affecting the individuals in different ways, especially with economic empowerment. The challenges is thrown upon to the government, both at the union and state levels, so that they can initiate some steps to develop all areas of the country without any geographical limitations. Okay. Then PPP projects in rural development. There are some PPP projects in rural development. Like there is very important scheme in rural development which is called Pura. So this scheme that stands for providing urban amenities in rural areas. This was a brainchild of our former president, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, who floated the concept of providing urban amenities in rural areas. So the concept is basically to provide four connectivities in terms of physical connectivity, electronic connectivity, knowledge connectivity, and economic connectivity for rural areas. So in a way, it brings infrastructure development with economic regeneration activities among rural areas that not only combat migration but also may lead to reverse migration. So the primary objective of Pura scheme is to provision of livelihood opportunities and urban amenities in rural areas to bridge the rural-urban divide. Okay. Then comes similar schemes are also introduced by the state government, like Mission Bhagiratha of Telangana government. So under this program, the Telangana government it aims to supply safe drinking water to every village and town. So this scheme is considered a very successful scheme, and it has also been appreciated by the Ministry of Jal Shakti for its very good performance. Then Mission Kakatiya is another important example of rural development scheme where tank irrigation on is linked with rural employment generation, poverty reduction, and agriculture growth. So Mission Kakatiya, it is a program for restoring all the minor irrigation tanks and lakes in Telangana state. So this program is also considered and it was inaugurated by former Chief Minister Sri KCR KC Rao, K. Chandrasekhar Rao in 2015 only. So these projects also it involves civil works to repair and restore water tanks. Then there are some issues regarding PPP projects. What are those issues? We'll quickly cover those issues before we sum up. So the number one reason is that private sector and public sector, like often there seems a conflict of interest because private sector motive is profitability and income maximization, whereas public sector, that is government motive, is objective of poverty reduction and sustainable development. Okay, within the same single project, so the stakeholder are having different interest. Then comes there is a risk that government funds are misused or they can be subsidized for promoting private interest. Then it can also enable the companies to externalize social and ecological cost to the public partner. Like often there are some reports or allegations regarding bypassing of environment impact assessment, which can lead to environmental degradation. Then these projects can also lead to preferential treatment of certain companies, which can lead to like crony capitalism and distortion of normal trading conditions. Then they're also problematic in the in a way that basic service and infrastructure sector, as these may lead to like selling of the basic public services, which are considered essential public services, and they can neglect the interest of the poor because often there are uh, some charges, some nominal charges as well. So that depends upon the paying capacity of the people. Okay, so like there are some user fee charges. So that's why in a way it makes uh, essential service given to some private sector. So despite all this, but we can say that despite all the critical objection, like PPPs are gaining ground nowadays, and they are more widespread in the basic services and infrastructure sector, particularly in the urban areas. So PPC is in rural development, they're still not very common, but they're increasingly opening our agriculture market sectors. And presently, rural PPPs are mainly concerned with organic farming and use of non-timber forest products and all. But again, it can be suggested that PPT can be successful if the responsibility and risk shared between public and private partners, they can be done in an optimal manner. And in order to make PPP in rural development to be a successful model, there should be clearly defining goals and communication among partners. And the project framework should also be based on these goals, so that effective rural poverty reduction is possible. So ultimately, we can say that despite the criticism, effective rural poverty reduction is only possible of public and private players if they increase their joint efforts in the context of globalization. So in view of this, government of India and even government of Telangana, they have initiated some very good projects, as I talked earlier, like Pura and Mission Bhagiratha, then Mission Kakatiya, to provide amenities and skill development activities for rural people. So that's why we can say that PPP is an emerging development model of India. And taking into consideration the significant role they played in the rural development, in economic development of the country, the government needs to invite more PPPs to strengthen the hands of the rural administrator. Okay. So with that we come to end of our this rural governance. Thank you, everyone.